Welcome to Forum 360, our global outlook with the local view. I'm Leslie Ungar, your host today. Tamsin Astor is a PhD and a chief habit scientist. She says we make 35,000 decisions every day, which leads to decision fatigue. We're going to have to talk to her about that number. She is known for giving her clients the tools to shift their mindset, organize their vision, and improve their habits to create efficient, productive businesses. Today, Tamsin is first going to help us navigate through the post-COVID time. All of us will face decisions daily that we have not had to face for over a year. I would like to divide our conversation into two parts. First, focus on coming out of COVID, and then how we could benefit from Tamsin's words of wisdom, COVID or non-COVID, about habits, the mistakes we make, and fun. So welcome, Tamsin.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm always impressed when someone is a PhD.
Yes, in England we call it, piled high and deep. You dig into the data and really, become a specialist.
Well, congratulations for that.
Thank you.
I stopped at Master's, so I have a great degree of respect
Thank you.
for going on. First, I want to take a look at what, quote, experts say about coming out of COVID, and then ask you what our expert in the studio has to say, okay?
Absolutely.
It's kind of like a version of fun games during COVID.
Yay.
Experts say that before filling up your calendar, carve out unstructured time to prepare yourself for post-pandemic life. But what does that mean? Haven't we all had enough of unstructured time?
Well, I think partly it's that we have to take stock of the fact that of the anxiety that's going to come up with engaging with people in an intimate social way again after 18 months, of not doing that, right? So, I remember the first in-person event I went to. I remember about an hour into it with people I didn't know. It was two people one person who'd interviewed me for a podcast, and I found about an hour in, I thought, I want to turn off the Zoom camera. Right? Because we've spent the last year and a half being able to detach and regroup. And even though the research suggests that being on Zoom is actually more exhausting because there's this expectation to maintain eye contact, because you're looking at maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 people at once, being in person again will create fatigue. So I'm a big fan of creating chunks of the day. And I often do that with my super overwhelmed clients who never give themselves any breaks during the day because of the slight fear of having time to ruminate. Create chunks after every event to process.
Well, that kind of leads me into my next experts say, okay, that downtime is an important part of learning. A 2012 study found that mental rest gives the mind a chance to reprocess. But what would mental rest look like when many people have not been very far out of their house?
Right, so I think doing things that allow your mind to wander. So walking, for example, is a brilliant example of mental rest, particularly if you walk around your neighborhood where you're not having to, watch out for things in a sort of very alert manner, right? That's something that's really great for mental rest. Watering the garden, weeding the garden, walking your dog, knitting, doing something where you're not following an incredibly complicated pattern, but doing something that has a sort of repetitive energy to it. Making your favorite soup, right? That you know the steps, but that allows your mind to wander is so vital for processing the information and memory, but also.
So my walking my dogs every day is really more for me than it is for them.
Absolutely.
Which I've kind of known that,
yeah.
but I'm not sharing
right?
that secret at home, yes. Experts say that managing a constantly changing pandemic safety rule guidelines along with everyday life has taken a toll on cognitive resources. Can you help us understand? I tried to look that up. I don't understand what that means.
Right, it's all to do with how, the processing, right? Like how much information can you process? How much can you handle? And humans do not like uncertainty. Uncertainty makes us frightened, which is why we have things like, stereotype. If you look this way, you probably vote this way. You probably think this way about, pro-life, pro-choice, or whatever, right? So we like to categorize people and create expectations of results and what's going to happen. If I do this, this will happen, right? And what has been incredibly difficult for the last year and a half is no idea. You're like, can I do this? Can I go there? Can I make this plan? Can I? And it's the indecision that creates, and the lack of knowledge about what's going to happen that creates the exhaustion and anxiety and fear.
Yes. In a different way, I've experienced that the last 4 to 6 weeks. I have a dog that was diagnosed with diabetes. Now, I've had dogs with cancer, with heart problems. Diabetes has been by far the hardest because there's so much uncertainty.
Right.
And that uncertainty has been
exhausting.
It has.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel better. It's not just me. Experts say, there is a saying, unstructured time is like a loose leash. How do we go from so much unstructured time for many, to structured time? How do we do that?
So I like to create, how do you start your day? How do you end your day, right? So that's a good place to start creating structure. So a lot of us, when we were going into the office, we had a morning routine and an evening routine that was pretty fixed, right? The alarm would go off at the same time. During the pandemic, it was well, if my meeting's not till 10, maybe I won't get out of bed until 9:15, right? So one of the things that I will often say to people, if they've had that space of unstructured time, is start by creating some structure that doesn't feel overwhelming, but that's maybe going to bed and getting up at the same time every day. Maybe start to eat lunch at the same time every day, and start to create some structure around your daily rhythms.
So there's a saying, as a communication coach, there's a saying that any challenge, and I think every challenge is a communication challenge, one answer is to chunk it into smaller pieces. So that's kind of the same thing you're saying, okay, so don't go completely to the other side, just take a couple things.
Yeah, exactly.
And start.
Exactly, let's start and end your day and eat lunch at the same time every day, and create that as an initial structuring frame.
Okay. How does one resist the urge to overcorrect, to go from the couch to filling up their schedule,
right,
or filling up their schedule with things outside of networking events or different kind of meetings or whatever? How do we resist that urge?
Well, partly it's about knowing oneself, right? If you are somebody that will always say yes, you have to limit yourself and go, I'm going to get back to you on responding to this event, this thing. So partly you have to know how you tend to respond in these situations. It's also really useful to know whether being around people in that way is energizing, right? I'm an extrovert, but I'm also very comfortable being on my own and love having chunks of time on my own. But I find being around people energizing and gives me, ideas and thoughts and joy and passion and all of that, right? In a very different way from being on my own, right? Whereas introverts who get out there and get on stage and do their thing and coach their clients, and then they're like, oh, that was exhausting and overwhelming. So part of it is know thyself, right? And then create some structures and rhythms and routines around how to navigate through that, right? So that you don't go from one extreme to the other.
That works for you, that may not be a friend or a spouse or someone
It's not
else's.
a one-size-fits-all, yeah.
Okay. All breaks are not created equal, but experts say we need breaks. But if you've been with, say, your kids all day because let's say that their schools were not open, perhaps a non-kid event is a break. So how do we identify taking a break in a post-COVID world?
So I think part of it is knowing what is soothing to you, right? So sometimes a break is going to be physical, right? The break is going to be get on your Peloton, right? You and I have discussed that, right? Or walk your dog, or go to a yoga class, or do something that's engaging and moving, because emotions are energy and motion. And if you've been navigating the emotions of others all day, it's going to create, particularly if you are somebody who's very empathic, a lot of emotional blocks a lot of emotions swirling in you, and it's just good to allow that to move through. Other times it might be I just want to sit in the hot tub or in my bath without anybody needing me, without anybody knocking on my door, putting their head in my lap, mom, 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 mom. When your kids are toddlers as well, or very young, there's a lot of demand for your physical, emotional presence, So again, it's, learning to pause and think, what do I need, right? Do I need people? Is a break going to be to go and hang out with my friends? Is it to move my body? Is it to sit quietly with my own thoughts and nobody else?
So a word I use is purposeful. So make the break something that you've thought about.
Yeah.
Not just, again, like you said, a one size fits all.
Yeah, exactly.
So to ease back in, okay, that's a phrase that we've heard, ease back into the workplace, ease back into this, to that. From your professional standpoint, what would that look like?
So that would be, somebody that is very much a fan of collecting two kinds of data. One is the qualitative and one is the quantitative. So what do I mean by that? Quantitative is the how many hours a day am I expected to be in the office when I go back to re-entry, and can I modify that? So gather the numbers, times, etc. And then the qualitative data is how do I feel about this, right? Okay. So if your boss is flexible and says, let's go with 3 days a week, you might think Monday, Wednesday, Friday would be great because I have the Tuesday and Thursday to and give myself a break from interacting with people again, right? So it's gathering some data on what that's going to look like. What do I have to wear? Do I have to be masked? How is that situation going to be handled, right? Like when I was coming here, I was like, oh, I haven't put on a pair of heels in 18 months. This is going to be fun, right? Because I've been, sitting on Zoom cameras where it's all been about the waist up, right? So thinking through that, and if you are used to wearing heels, 10 hours a day pre-COVID, but you haven't, maybe think, so to gather the data is what I say, and then make a plan from that.
I think I'm the only person in the world that wore heels and a bra during
during COVID.
That was one thing I read about halfway through COVID was that apparently nobody was wearing a bra. Yeah. Or sometimes they would hang them on the back of a chair if they needed them. Yeah. But apparently it wasn't a popular move. I have a question, and I know that all generalizations are not true, but we heard a lot about pods and people being in pods where there was safety. I kind of believe that people in a pod, nobody told the truth. If they did
break it,
they aren't going to tell you.
Yeah.
So from your professional standpoint, can you talk at all about the pros or cons of pods? And also how do you, if you were in a pod, how do you break out of the pod now?
Right, so I think partly people did it as a way of creating safety, right, and predictability. And I think that was really important if you had children, right? And there was a lot of, variation I saw in my friend groups about how big or small that was, and whether it included things like sleepovers or just outside play, etc., right, and how you navigated that whole thing. I think, we are social beings. I know we are social beings, right? And that creating space for that to be prioritized is really, really vital. I'm sure people broke their pod rules all the time, but, I think that as long as they felt safe and contained within it, that was the important thing. I think in terms of breaking it, again, it's down to communication. How are you talking about that with your people? I mean, it's interesting to me here in Ohio, since the 3rd of June, we haven't had to wear masks. But every different business that I've gone into since then has had a different rule. Some grocery stores, you have to be masked, even if you're vaccinated, even though it's past June 3rd, right? Others are the governor said you don't have to, regardless of whether you're vaccinated or not, right? So I think moving forward, I'm a big fan of just I walk at every building I walk into with a mask. Do I need to wear it?
Before I ask my next question, let me just stop quickly and reintroduce. Today we're looking at life in a post-pandemic world with Tamsin Astor, PhD, and Chief Habit Scientist, which we are going to find out about in just a couple of minutes. A couple more questions on post-COVID time. Is there a way to be proactive to avoid situations that may make us uncomfortable, or do we not know until we get there?
I think partly know thyself, right? And partly, be willing to be uncomfortable, right? Do I want to leave this place because actually I've realized not seeing this person for the last 18 months has made me happier? Because this person is a terrible, Debbie Downer, or this person spends their entire time, complaining about or showing off about or telling me how fabulous their kids are, and whatever it is in a way that is triggering, right? So I think part of it is kind of going in a little bit as a scientist. I'm going to go in and I'm like, ooh, do I like being in this place? Do I like hanging out with these people? Do I like, the energy of this? Do I like being around these people? And then if I don't, being like, okay, I'm gonna, leave this situation, and that's okay. So I think that's the way I think, and I'm encouraging my clients to go into it, is go forth, check it out, but be willing to stick by what you know, right? And what you feel, that data, right?
Now, speaking of feeling, I've tried to call it COVID crazy rather than be judgmental about. In the beginning, if people were too strict, not strict enough, and even as things have unfolded, they'll do this, but they won't do that. And I'm like, that makes no sense. So I just call it COVID crazy. Yeah. But you contend that we be kind and patient and non-judgmental. So please tell me, how do I do that?
So, I think it's really tough. I mean, when the mask mandate came down, I went to Target with my 3 kids, and my 17-year-old was like, I used to be able to judge people based on whether or not they wore a mask in public. Now I don't have that quick rule to judge people. And I'm really uncomfortable because not only am I not going to be able to judge people, but they will be judging me if I do or do not wear a mask. And we were like walking around Target going, do we, don't we, do we, don't we, right? So I think part of it is going into the world remembering that a lot of the reasons people, judge, ourselves included, is out of wanting to categorize, wanting to reduce the decisions, wanting to understand, and out of fear, right? We create a lot of fear around the other. We have a history of that in this country, of creating fear around the other. Anybody who looks different from us, thinks differently from us. So I think one thing is, I love the energy of moving into a space or moving into interactions with people of, I don't know what they've experienced. I don't know their traumas. I don't know what they've experienced that might make them think or feel or find or react to me or something I might say or think or do in a particular way. So I'm going to go into this with as open as a kind of heart as possible. And the other piece, which one of my early Buddhist teachers taught me, is that we have limited mental space in our heads. And if we're using up chunks of it, thinking about how one person is so irritating or how this person drives me crazy, we could be using that for finding a cure for cancer, for planning a dinner party, for thinking how we can make our lover smile, right? Like how we could do something for one of our children. And if we're using up all of this mental space for like, this person is so irritating, free that mental space up.
I have a saying that the most expensive real estate really in the world is between our ears.
Totally.
It's, it's smaller than what is available in Manhattan or San Francisco. And you're taking it a step further and saying if we're putting, say, negative thoughts in there, then we don't have room for other things.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of that, no, you have a very, I would say, kind of chilled vibe, and people, they meet you or they see you on your website. They might say, well, what does she know? She has everything. She has an accent, and she has a PhD, and she has 3 kids that I'm sure are lovely. But you have had your share of adversity. So I want to ask you, how do some people rebound faster from adversity than others?
So I think, we've heard a lot in the last few years about resilience. And I think one of the things that's really interesting when you look at how people experience trauma, particularly through their childhood, right, is we learn coping skills. And when we learn how to navigate our responses to stress, right, which is really a large part of what this is about, right? We're put into a situation which causes a massive spike in adrenaline and cortisol. We're in a fight, flight, freeze, fawn situation. What do we do with that, right? How do we recognize the stimulus for what it is, and how do we modify our response, modulate how we're going to react to the people around us? And when we learn how to do that efficiently, then we can become more resilient, right? It's one of the things that a lot of people have said to me. In the last 2 months, I've gone through a huge, massive trauma, which again has totally shaken my sense of self and my, and who I am and what I'm doing. But through the resiliency practices that I've created through my other experiences in my life, is that I've managed to navigate through that. So for me, I know that what helps me, sleeping well, eating well, exercising daily, being able to reach out to friends and say, help, can you drop off some food for me? Can you take one of my kids? Having a good therapist, having coaches, having people who you can say, come and support me, be part of my team, right? And that's a big part of it. So it's as you go through it, it's recognizing that you're having this response, and then what can I do, right? So a big thing for me is that I feel the energy in my body when I'm in a state of trauma. So for me, if I don't let that disperse, which the easiest for me is to move, right? And there are a number of different strategies we see from research on burnout and stress, right? Moving, crying, hugging somebody, having a positive social interaction, journaling. Like, there are a whole load of different techniques that you can lean into to get the energy moving out of your system.
Now, you talk about 3 keys to create the life you want. Perhaps you could share that with us?
Sure.
As in some ways we have some opportunity in business, we would call it rebranding, but even in our personal lives coming out of, COVID, we have some opportunity to kind of do-overs.
Absolutely.
Three keys to create the life you want.
So this is basically the foundation of what I coach people around. So the 3 keys, and I sort of describe it in this way, is the vision, which I think of as the telescope. So it's getting clear on where do you want your life to go? What are you building? And there's a lot of classic stuff in there, like writing your obituary and thinking about your legacy, but getting really clear on what you want, not on the shoulds, right? Because we're terrible. I should look this way, I should want this, I should be happy with this, because I'm a woman, because I'm white, because I have a PhD, because I'm 44, because right? Rather than like, what do I really, really want and desire in my life? The second is the habits, the daily habits, which I think of as the microscope. So it's the, how am I actually spending my time, and does that connect with that bigger vision? And how do we connect the two? Mindset. And when I talk about mindset, it's not just my personal mental habits, it's also how I deal with the chatter, right? The boundaries. The when my mother says, when my ex-husband says, when my ex-client says, when my kid says, when my friend says, do I take that information and go, and then I'm going to reject that because that doesn't fit with the vision that I have?
So when I introduced you, I said that you were chief habit scientist. That's just so intriguing. Several years ago, I think it was Inc. magazine that started featuring different titles that instead of chief financial officer, chief experience officer.
Right.
And that kind of reminds me of a chief habit scientist. So tell us what it is and why we should care.
So it was a title that I created for myself and bestowed upon myself, because when I first started working, I realized that coach, executive coach, life coach didn't really fit what I was doing. And I strongly believe in the value of science and data, as I've explained, and and I have a strong research background. And so I was trying to think of something that had like habits and science. And then, a friend of mine gave a talk to a group of us coaches about the importance of being the CEO of your business, and how, when you're beginning in your business, and you're doing all the roles, or maybe doing 90% of the roles, it's very easy not to feel like you're taking that CEO status, right? And as you grow in your business and you start delegating and hiring out and having your social media manager and all of that, it feels easier to step into that. So I was looking for something that made me embody, or allowed me to embody the energy of expert, being the CEO, and then included my focus on habits and gathering data. So, yeah.
I have to ask, for those watching or listening, if you are listening and not watching, I do want to share with you that our PhD today, close to me, has blue nails and a nose ring. And I say this because I think when we think traditionally of a PhD, we don't necessarily think of that.
Yeah.
So does this mean that we have more options as to what things look like? Or talk to me about that, because I feel like these are purposeful decisions that mean something.
Absolutely. No, I am somebody that very much cares about being able to dress and express myself. I've also got 13 tattoos too, and I know 8 holes in my ears or something. I feel like it's very important to be able to express yourself through how you dress and what you wear and your tattoos and piercings and so on. And I think you can still do it respectfully. I'm wearing a jacket. Yes, it's gold and glittery, and but I think it's possible to have status and be considered an expert without falling into the conventional, you have to wear a black pantsuit and pearl necklace. I worked with a consultant, and I said to her, a clothing consultant, when I started doing more public speaking, I said, I absolutely am never going to wear a matching pantsuit, you know, and I'm not wearing black unless it's like a rocker t-shirt of a concert I've been to.
Hillary or Kamala, either one,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. And so she helped me get like orange jackets and turquoise jackets and spiky heels and leopard print, because I think that speaks to my personality and who I am. And I think partly by modeling exactly who I am and what I feel and think is that for my potential clients and my current clients, I'm saying, you know, you can authentically be yourself and create the life you want without having to fill a box or predefined way of seeing yourself.
That's why I wanted you to talk on that. And I hope that was okay to bring
Absolutely.
that up. I have one question, and this gets like a 1 or 2 word answer.
Sure.
Does having a PhD in behavior help with your own 3 kids?
Yes, because I know the science. No, because, you know, kids never want to listen to their parents.
Coming out of COVID is going to mean something different to each of our viewers and listeners. Our expert guest today, Tamsin Astor, is a PhD and chief habit scientist. You could say her goal is helping all of us have better habits. Our goal today was to give you some help in making decisions to improve your habits, especially as we come out of this pandemic, to create efficient, productive businesses and lives. Tamsin has shared with us her desire for us to experience freedom and joy and fun. And also that perhaps we could reassess our coffee, sofa, couch, pizza, Netflix pattern. I'm Leslie Ungar. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360, our global outlook with a local view.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.